Megiddo, Outer Rim, vaults of the Dressian Kiolsh Merchant Bank, 470 days after Geonosis. Wallen Vow enjoyed irony, and there was none more profound than seizing as a soldier the inheritance his father had denied him for wanting Lo join the army. On the metal door of the deposit box, a cupboard with a set of sliding shelves, was an engraved plate that read, V.O.U., Count of GSL. "When the old Chakar dies, that'll be me," Vow said. "In theory, anyway. It'll pass to my cousin." He looked over his shoulder, even though the sensors in his Mandalorian helmet gave him wraparound vision. "Didn't I say thin out, Delia? Move it." Vow wasn't used to anything other than instant obedience from his squads. He drummed it into them on Commando, the hard way when necessary. Skirata thought you built Special Forces soldiers by treats and pats on the head, but it just produced weaklings. Vow's squads had the lowest casualty rates because he reinforced the animal will Lo survive in every man. He was proud of it. "You did," Boss said, "but you look like you need a hand. Anyway, you're not our sergeant any longer. Technically speaking. No disrespect. Citizen Vow." I was hard on them because I cared. Because they had to be hard to survive. Cal never understood that, the fool. Vow still had trouble breathing some days, thanks Lo the broken nose Skirata had given him. The crazy little Chakar didn't understand training at all. The next droid patrol wouldn't come this way for a few hours. Security droids trundled constantly through the labyrinth of corridors deep under the Mygeetan ice, a banking stronghold the Moons claimed could never be breached. It still made sense to get out sooner rather than later. And Delta should have banged out by now. They'd called in airstrikes and sabotaged ground defenses, and Bakara's Marines were moving in again. They'd achieved their mission, and it was extraction time. "I should have thrashed more sense into you then," Voss said. He unfolded a plastoid bivouac sheet and knotted the corners. It was always a bad idea not to plan for the most extreme situation. He'd been certain he would only take what was rightfully his, but this was too good to pass up. "Okay, you and Scorch hold this between you while I fill it. We can empty the... I steal. You don't." It was a fine point, but it mattered to Vow. Skirata might have raised a pack of hooligans, but Vow's squads were disciplined. Even Sev. Sev was psychotic and lacked even the most basic social graces, but he wasn't a criminal. As Vow tipped the first likely-looking box into the makeshift container cash credits and bonds, which would do very nicely indeed, the whiff of oily musk announced the arrival of his Strill, Lord Myrtilin. Fixer stepped back to let the animal pass. "Murd, I told you to wait by the exit," said Vow. All Strills were intelligent, but Murd was especially smart. The animal padded down the narrow passage in velvet silence and looked up expectantly, somehow managing not to drool of the floor for once. It fixed Vow with an intense, knowing gold stare, making any anger impossible. Who couldn't love a face like that? That Strill had stood by him since boyhood, and anyone who didn't see its miraculous spirit had no common decency or heart. They said Strills stank, but Vow didn't care. A little natural musk never hurt anyone. "You want to help Myrdika? Here." He slipped his flamethrower off his webbing. "Carry this. Good Myrd." The Strill took the barrel of the weapon in its massive jaws and sat back on its haunches. Drool ran down to the trigger guard and pooled on the floor. "Cute," Sev muttered. "And clever." Vow signaled to Myrd to watch the door and slid the drawers of the Vow deposit box from their runners. "Anyone who doesn't like my friend Myrd can slanapi." "Sarge, it's the ugliest thing in the galaxy," Scorch said, "and we've seen plenty of ugly." "Yeah, you've got a mirror," said Sev. "Ugliness is an illusion, gentlemen." Vow began sorting through his disputed inheritance. Like beauty, like color, all depends on the light. The first thing that caught his eye in the family box was his mother's flawless square-cut Chironi sapphire, the size of a human thumbprint, set on a pin and flanked by two smaller matching stones. In some kinds of light, they were a vibrant cobalt blue, while in others they turned forest green. beautiful, but real forests had been destroyed to find them, and slaves died mining them. The only reality is action. Sev grunted deep in his throat. He didn't like wasting time and wasn't good at hiding it. His HUD icon showed he was watching Mird carefully. Whatever you say, Sergeant. The strong room held a treasure trove of portable, easily hidden and untraceable things that could be converted to credits anywhere in the galaxy. Val stumbled on only one deposit box, whose contents were inexplicably worthless, a bundle of love letters tied with green ribbon. He read the opening line of the first 3 and threw them back. Apart from that one box, the rest were a rich man's emergency belt, the equivalent of the soldier's survival kit of a fishing line, blade, and a dozen compact essentials for staying alive behind enemy lines. Val's 100-liter backpack had room enough for a few extras. Everything gems, wads of flimsy bonds, cash credits, metal coins, small lacquered jewel boxes he didn't pause to open, was tipped in unceremoniously. Delta stood around fidgeting, unused to idleness while the chrono was counting down. I told you to leave me here. Val could still manage the voice of menace. Don't disobey me. You know what happens. Boss hung manfully to his end of the plastoid sheet, but his voice was shaky. You can't give us an order, Citizen Val. They were the best Special Forces troops in the galaxy, and here Val was, still unable to manage the thank you or well done that they deserved. But much as he wanted to, the cold black heart of his father, his true legacy, choked off all attempts to express it. Nothing was ever good enough for his father, especially him. Maybe the old man just couldn't bring himself to say it, and he meant to all along. No, he didn't. Don't make excuses for him, but my boys know me. I don't have to spell it out for them. I ought to shoot you, Val said. You're getting sloppy. Val checked the chrono on his forearm plate. Any time now, Bakara's galactic marines would start pounding the city of Jaga with glacier busters. He was sure he'd feel it like a seismic shock. Looking for anything in particular? Sev asked. No. Random opportunism. Val didn't need to cover his tracks. His father didn't know or care if he was alive or dead. Your disappointment of a son came back, Papa. You didn't even know I disappeared to Commando for 10 years, did you? There was nothing the senile Hutt wound could do about it anyway. Val was the one better able to swing a crippling punch these days. Just a smokescreen, and make it worth the trip. He knew what their next question would have been if they'd asked it. They never asked what they knew they didn't need to be told. What was he going to do with it all? He couldn't tell them. It was too much, too soon. He was going to hand it all over to a man who'd kill him for a bet. All except what was rightfully his. I'm not planning to live in luxurious exile, Val said. Scorch stepped over Mird and stood at the door, Dees ready. Donating it to the treasury, then? It'll be used responsibly. Val's backpack was now stuffed solid, and heavy enough to make him wince when he heaved it up on his shoulders. He tied the plastoid sheet into a bundle worth $1,000,000, maybe, and slung it across his chest. He hoped he didn't fall or he'd never get up again. Oh yeah, he said, nodding toward the doors. Let's go. Mird braced visibly and then shot out into the corridor. It always responded to the word Oya with wild, noisy enthusiasm because that meant they were going hunting, but it was intelligent enough to know when to stay silent. Mirdala Mird. Clever Mird. It was the right name for the Strill. Delta advanced down the corridor toward the ducts and environmental control room that kept the underground bank from freezing solid, following Mird's wake, which even Val had to admit it was marked by a trail of saliva. Strills dribbled. It was part of their bizarre charm, like flight, 6 legs, and jaws that could crunch clean through bone. Sev skidded on a patch of Strill spit. Fearfeck. Could be worse, Scorch said. Much worse. Val followed up the rear, his helmet's panoramic sensor showing him the view at his back. There was an art to moving forward with that image in front of you on the HUD, an image that sent the unwary stumbling. Like the men he'd trained, Val could see past the disorienting things the visor displayed. They were 50 meters from the vents that would take them back to the surface, and Fixer's waiting snowspeeder when the watery green lighting flickered, and Murd skidded to a halt, ears pricked. Val judged by the animal's reaction, but Sev confirmed his worst fears. "Ultrasonic spike," he said. "I don't know how, but I think we tripped an alarm." Fixer's voice filled their helmets. "Drive's running. I'm bringing the Snowy as close to the vent as I can." Sev. Boss turned to face Val and held his hand out for the bundle. "Come on, Sergeant. I can manage. Get going." "You first." "I said get going, 3-8. No nicknames. That told Boss that Val meant business." Sev and Scorch sprinted down the final stretch to the compartment doors and forced them apart again. The machine voice of rotors and pumps flooded the silent corridor. Everyone stopped dead for a split second. They could hear the clatter of approaching droid and organic guards, the noise magnified by the acoustics of the corridors. Val estimated the minutes and seconds. It wasn't good. "Get your sheps up that vent before I vape the lot of you," Val snapped. "Oh, sick. I put them in danger. All for this stupid jaunt, all for lousy credits." "Now!" He shoved Boss hard in the back, and the 3 commandos did what they always did when he yelled at them and used a bit of force. They obeyed. "Shift it, Delta." The vent was a steep vertical shaft. The service ladder inside was designed for maintenance droids, with small recessed footholds and a central rail. Boss looked up, assessing it. "Let's cheat," he said, and fired his rappel line high into the shaft. The grappling hook clattered against the metal, and he tugged to check the line was secure. "Stand by." The shaft could only take one line at a time. Boss shot up the shaft with his hoist drive squealing, bouncing the soles of his boots against the wall in what looked like dramatic leaps until he vanished. The hoist stopped whining. There was a moment of quiet punctuated by the clacking of armor plates. "Clear," his voice echoed. Sev shot his line vertically. It made a whiffling sound like an arrow in flight as it paid out. Metal clanged and the fiber cord went tight. "Line secure, Sev!" Sev winched himself up the shaft with an ungainly skid-ding technique. Scorch waited for the all-clear and then full-load him. Val was left standing at the bottom of the shaft with Murd, facing a long climb. Murd could fly, but not in such a confined space. Val fired his line, waited for one of the commandos to secure it, and then attached the bundle of valuables to it. Then he held out his hands to Myrd to take the flamethrower from its mouth. "Good, Myrd," he whispered. "Now, Oya, off you go. Up, Myrdika." The Strill could hang on to the line by its jaws alone if necessary, but Myrd just whined in dissent and sat down with all the sulky determination of a human child. "Myrd, go. Does no Shibwir ever listen to me? Go." Myrd stayed put. "It'll never leave me. Not until the day I die." Val gave up and tugged the line as a signal to the commandos to haul away. He didn't have time to argue with the Strill. "If I'm not out of here in 2 minutes," he said, "get all this stuff to Captain Ordo. Understood?" There was a brief silence on Val's helmet comlink. "Understood," said Boss. The next few moments felt stretched into forever. The staccato clatter of approaching droid guards grew louder. Myrd rumbled ominously and stared toward the doors, poised on its haunches as if to spring at the first droid to appear. It would defend Val to the last. It always had. Eventually, the length of thin fiber cord snaked back down the shaft and slapped against the floor. Boss sounded a little breathless. "Up you come, Sergeant." Val reattached the line to his belt and scooped Myrd up in both arms, hoping his winch would handle the extra weight. As he rose, kicking away from the shaft wall, the machinery groaned and spat. He could see the cold gray light above him, and a helmet not unlike his own Mandalorian T-shaped visor peering down at him, picked out in an eerie blue glow. Now he could hear the throb of the snowspeeder's drive. Fixer was right above them. As Val squeezed his shoulders through the top of the vent, Myrd leapt clear. Scorch and Sev dropped to the rock-hard snow with their DC-17S trained on something Van couldn't yet see. When he hauled himself out, a blaster bolt seared past his head, and he found himself in the middle of a firefight. A ferocious wind roared in his throat mic. Val slammed the vent's grill shut and seared it with his custom Mersun blaster, welding the metal tight to the coaming. Then he dropped a small proton grenade down the shaft through a gap. The snow shook with the explosion below. Nobody was going to be coming up behind them. But everyone and his pet AK now knew the Dreschen Kielschbank had intruders Republic troops. A distant boom followed by the whomp 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 of artillery almost drowned out the blaster fire and howling wind. The Galactic Marines were right on time. "Okay, Bakara's started," Scorch said. "Nice of him to stage a diversion." Megiddo's relentlessly white landscape gave no clue that it housed cities deep below. Only a few were visible on the surface. The packed snow of eons was pierced by jagged mountains that formed glass canyons like extravagant ice sculptures. A surface patrol 6 droids on snowshoe-like feet, 10 organics who were probably moons under the cold weather gear, had cut them off from the snowspeeder just meters away. Rounds zapped and steamed off the vessel's fuselage. Fixer, kneeling beside it, returned a hail of blue D's fire that kept the security patrol pinned down. "If that Snowy gets damaged, we're never getting off this rock." Val checked his panoramic vision. Murd was close at his side, pressing against him. He could see only the patrol. Nothing else showed up on his sensors. That didn't mean there weren't more closing in on them, though. The big bundle of plunder lay on the snow where Delta had dropped it. Right then, it was simply convenient cover. Val crawled behind his oversized multi-million credit sandbag and took aim. The bedap badap badap of blasters and ragged breathing filled his helmet. His, Delta's. But there was no chatter. Delta Squad exchanged few words during engagements lately. They'd been born together, raised together, and they'd come as close to knowing one another's thoughts as any normal humans could. Now they were laying down fire exactly as he'd trained them while Fixer defended their getaway vessel, all without a word. How the Moons would explain away a Mandalorian fighting with Republic forces, Val wasn't sure, but then everyone knew that Mandos would fight for anyone for the right price. Scorch clipped a grenade launcher on his Dees. "Not good," he said. "More droids." Val now saw what Scorch could. His HUD picked up shapes moving in rigid formation, almost invisible to infrared, but definitely showing up in the electromagnetic spectrum. Then he saw them rounding an outcrop of glittering crystal, clanking ludicrous things with long snouts, a platoon of them. Scorch fired the grenade, smashing into the front rank of 4. An eruption of snow and metal fragments fanned into the air and were whipped away by the wind. The rank behind was caught by the shrapnel from their comrades, and 2 toppled over, decapitated by buckled chunks of metal. But the rest kept coming. Val checked the topography on his HUD. They were approaching down an ice wadi almost opposite the first patrol's location, about to cut across the path between Fixer and the rest of them, and that meant the only way to the speeder now was to run the enemy gauntlet. Sev and Boss began working their way to the snow speeder on their bellies, pausing to fire grenades high over the ice boulders, and then scrambling a few more meters while the droids paused and the Moons took brief cover. Shots hissed around the Commandos as blaster bolts shaved paint off their plates and hit the snow, vaporizing it. One round deflected off Val's helmet with an audible sizzle. He felt the impact like being slapped around the head. All he felt at that moment was foolish. Not afraid, not in fear for his life, just stupid for getting it wrong. It was worse than physical terror. He'd overplayed his hand. He'd put Delta in this spot. He had to get them out. "You're conspicuous in that black armor, Sarge," Scorch said kindly. "It's worse than having Omega alongside. What say you back out of here and leave me to hold them?" If anyone was going to do any holding, it was Val. Humor an old man. He fumbled in his belt for an EMP grenade. "I stop the droids, you pick off the wets." Wets. Organics. He was talking like Omega now. "Then we all run for it. Deal?" Scorch twisted the grenade launcher to one side and switched his Dees to automatic, forcing the moon guards to scatter. 2 dropped behind a frozen outcrop. He fired again, shattering the ice, which turned out to be a brittle crystalline rock that sent shards flying like arrows. There was a shriek of agony that turned into a panting scream. It echoed off the walls of the canyon. He grunted, apparently satisfied. Sounds like 9 wets left in play. 8, if one's taking care of him, Val said. Moons aren't that nice. Fixer, you okay? Val waited for a reply. The world had suddenly gone silent except for that screaming moon. The droid seemed to be regrouping behind a 10-meter chunk of dark gray ice. Fixer? Fine, Sarge. Okay, here goes. Val fired. This EMP grenade had enough explosive power to make a mess of a small room, but its pulse was what really did the damage over a much larger area. It fried droid circuits. The small explosion echoed in scattered chunks of ice, and then there was a long silence punctuated only by the distant pounding of cannon as the Galactic Marines smashed their way into Zygot. Val refocused on the EM image in his HUD. He crawled to the bundle, dragging it into cover and strapping it back on his chest. It was way too much to carry, and he couldn't move properly. He knelt on all fours like a heavily pregnant woman trying to get up. I don't see movement. It's okay, Sarge. They're zapped. Okay, just the wets to finish off then. He switched back to infrared. The moon guards would show up like beacons. I'll warm them up while you make a move. Val pulled out the flamethrower, eased himself into a kneeling position, and opened the valve. Myrd cocked its head, eyes fixed on the weapon. Where'd you get that, Sarge? Scorch asked. Borrowed it from a flame trooper. Does he know? He won't mind. That thing could melt droids. I was saving the fuel for a tight spot. There was still no movement. Val estimated that the patrol was still in the canyon, maybe looking for a way around behind them. The moon, who'd been injured, was now silent, unconscious, or dead. Like this. I should have a full minute's fuel, so once I start run. You too, Myrd. He gestured Myrd toward the snowspeeder and pointed to the flamethrower. Go, Myrd. Follow boss. It was just a case of taking a blind run at it. I'm not as fast as I used to be, and I'm carrying too much. But a wall of flame was a blunt and terrifying instrument against almost any life form. Val struggled to his feet and ignited the flame. The roaring jet spat ahead of him as he drew level with the small pass where the moon patrol was holed up. Then the sheet of flame blinded him to what lay beyond it. He only heard the screams and saw the flash on icons across his HUD as Delta Squad sprinted for the idling snowspeeder. Val backed away, counting down the seconds left of his fuel supply, ready to switch to his blaster when it ran out. Nobody was expecting a flamethrower on an ice patrol. Surprise was half the battle. Val turned and ran, gasping for breath. Not a bad turn of speed for his age, not bad at all on ice and so heavily laden, and there was Myrd ahead of him, having listened for once, and the speeder was coming about. And the ice opened up beneath him. It took him a moment to realize he was falling down a sloping tunnel and not just sinking into unexpected soft snow. Fixer called out, but even though the sound filled Val's helmet, he didn't catch what was said. The 2 bags of booty took him down. Get clear! Val yelled, even though he had no need to with a helmet comlink. That's an order. Sarge, we can't. Shut up. Go. If you come back for me, if anyone comes back, I'll shoot you on sight. Sarge, we could... I raised you to survive. Don't humiliate me by going soft. I can't believe I said that. Delta didn't argue again. Val was in semi-darkness now, his HUD, scrolling with the icons of Delta's view of the ice field beneath the speeder as it lifted clear. Party, said a voice in his helmet, but he lost the rest of the sentence, and the link faded into raw static. The last thing I'll ever say to them is, shut up. Noble exit. Val. Mortal danger was a funny thing. He was sure he was going to die, but he wasn't terrified, and he wasn't worried about more patrols. He was more preoccupied by what he'd fallen into. A vague memory came back to him. As he slid down a few more meters, trying to stop his fall with his heels more out of instinct than intent, a detached sense of curiosity prevailed. So this was what dying was actually like. Then he remembered. Megiddo's ice was honeycombed by tunnels made by giant carnivorous worms. He came to rest with a thud on what felt like a ledge. "Oh, sick," he said. Well, if he wasn't dead, he soon would be. Mird! Where are you, Vertica?" There was no answer but the crunching and groaning of shifting ice. But he still had the proceeds of the robbery strapped to him, both his goal and his fate. Val wasn't planning on dying just yet. He was now too rich to let go of life.